Good morning. Welcome to chapter 16 of the Ministry of Ordinary Places. I hope this day finds you well and healthy and not totally bored. Chapter 16, a theology of endurance. And boy, do we need that. It was the year 2000, a new millennium. I was driving through an unfamiliar side of town trying to decode the directions I'd scribbled on the back of an envelope on my way to an interview for my first real job. In the weeks leading up to the moment, I'd done all the necessary prep for this important mile marker on my journey to actual adulthood. I sat in the apartment where Corey and I had lived since our wedding a year or so prior and dialed up J. Crew on the landline to order a proper business suit. There would be no boring black for this savvy woman on the cusp of a career in sales. No, I went for the silvery blue-gray wool crepe, certain it was a classic that would stand the test of time. My days spent stocking and folding the denim wall at the Gap had almost come to an end. I had my hair trimmed at the strip mall. I lined my lips with my favorite eyeliner. This was a thing in my life for a while, forgive me, Lord. Filled them in with Dr. Pepper chapstick and was on my way armed with a college degree I had never used. I zipped through the city, checking my makeup at red lights, taking cleansing breaths to try to quiet the butterflies flapping in my gut. I was headed toward a better life, and I was ready. It was all fine and good, as they say, until you forget you're driving on a one-way street and you turn directly in front of 2 lanes of traffic, instantly pummeled on your driver's side by a cargo van on a mission. The crash spun my crumpled Pontiac Sunfire a full 180, landed me right by the front door of my would-be employer. Emotionally whiplashed into a curious place of calm, I sat in my paradoxically pastel business suit while tongue-tied strangers picked glass from my hair, dabbed hydrogen peroxide on the cuts along my hands and cheeks. A panicked desperation to reach Corey washed over me, off working on a construction job hours away, unreachable. All I wanted in that moment was to teleport to our basement apartment. I lay my head on his lap and sobbed my ever-living guts out. I wanted to burn that bad omen suit and pretend the whole thing had never happened. Instead, I shoved my true feelings to a far corner, sat through the interview as planned, fought my base impulse knowing it would serve me well. I was good at self-control, or so I thought. When the human resource director asked me about my biggest weakness, I fluently delivered the cliche go-tos. That I can be a perfectionist, that sometimes I expect too much of myself and others, that I'm competitive to a fault. I was unshakable. From my peripheral vision, I saw a tow truck hoist my beloved car, now totaled, into its flatbed and haul it away. I didn't turn my head. I didn't even flinch. Corey picked up pizza on his way home and spent the evening kissing my forehead and telling me how worried he had been when the call had come in. 2 days later, they offered me the job. We were still there in that drab apartment when our marriage crumbled 6 months later. It happened fast, like steel meeting glass, and it happened in slow motion. A car veering into the wrong lane under the watchful eye of no one in particular. I have always thought of myself as a leaver. When I was 4, I began the long tradition of spending part of each summer with my aunt, uncle, and cousin in Pennsylvania. I fell into step, blending seamlessly into their routine. They bought my pass to the community pool, noticed when my pants became high waters, doled out my allowance, and took me on lavish family vacations to places like Disney World and Niagara Falls. For 1 month of the year, I lived as the fraternal twin of my cousin Vicky. I went to Catholic Vacation Bible School, watched Billy Idol on MTV, and developed a taste for fried pierogies and freedom. I was marked as a girl who went places, my connections sewn with elastic. I always went home to the old Ohio farmhouse and the family inside, but I could stretch just as easily as I could dream. Brave and sturdy, I assembled quickly. I missed curfew often, went to college out of state, married a Hoosier, I moved, I changed my mind, I drove too fast. When the dust of our marital collapse settled, it was second nature for me to run. The fight or flight response, hardwired deeply within our psychology, is considered one of mankind's most primal urges. Heap success on us, make us believe survival is shaky, and hormones flood our central nervous system, instinctively diverting our behavior into one of two outcomes. Here's what one expert wrote. By its very nature, the fight or flight system bypasses our rational mind when our more well thought out beliefs exist and moves us into attack mode. This state of alert causes us to perceive almost everything in our world as a possible threat to our survival. Fear becomes the lens through which we see the world. Our heart is not open. Our rational mind is deranged and disengaged. Our consciousness is focused on fear, not love. A collusion of trust and secrets have left us shattered, with no one but each other to tend to the nicks and the gashes. Left alone long enough, anguish can fade to apathy, and I'm still not sure which one is more dangerous. We circled each there in the apartment 4D, still cooking dinner, still paying bills. We'd lost our fight to the fires, so we sat opposite ends of the couch and watched David Letterman. At times we still laughed together. Those were the nights I would cry when I went to bed. I knew I'd miss him, but I also knew it was over. Lapsing into deeply internal lives, we told no one what was happening. Divorce was not an option. Both of us had been warned early on, and the inevitable shame of the church loomed large. On the darkest nights, I wished the cargo van had hit me harder. Then, right in the middle of guilt and uncertainty, a miracle. I was walking past the mirror I'd painted blue to match our wedding towels, catching my reflection, wrecked, ruined, and depleted of hope. I was struck with a thought as clear as the blue eyes of the husband I'd been avoiding. The words were inaudible and entirely inescapable. Do you see how hard the enemy is fighting to destroy your marriage? Just imagine the plans that I have for you together. Isn't it just like God to show up uninvited and derail our plans for self-loathing? Silently, the seed took root. Maybe desperate, despite what I was feeling and the rawness of my present life, I could be a stayer. Maybe the Jesus I love could be the Jesus I trusted in the face of impossible odds. The healing didn't happen in my heart, not at first. It landed bluntly in my hypothalamus. I was still sunk in incomprehensible emotional distress. But my old circuitry had been yanked out. New wiring grafted in somewhere amid the sadness of ordinary life. Finally, I unearthed the faith to believe that I could shelve my escape plans and choose to start over, a fighter. The years ticked by and our hearts healed, one mercy at a time. We returned to our frailty and apologized more often. We got better at telling the truth. We held on with a white-knuckled grip even when it seemed easier not to. The low times dwindled, fewer and further between, and when doubt banged at our door, we now knew we didn't have to welcome it in and make a bed for it. We started a family. We grew. We fell in love for the long haul. Eventually, to our great surprise, we adapted to city life and all that came with it. Our lives took on the air of adventure, pulling us tightly toward each other and a new rush of uncharted land. Though our marriage was stronger than ever, having assimilated to the practice of leaving, moving on, and conquering the unknown, I grew antsy and bored. Staring straight through the life I truly loved, I strained to find bigger cities and glittier neighborhoods. At night I dreamed of running down unfamiliar streets, snapping awake sweaty and buzzed from the rush of imagined endorphins. It was all coming back to me. I did not want to slow down. I was addicted to upheaval. This unrest bled fluidly into the corners of my life. Once wonderstruck by our bright reality, I now entertained fantasies about the larger house one street over that was begging for a renovation. Conditioned to view leaving as a viable option the instant something didn't meet my expectations, I was particularly fleet of foot when it came to our church, which, after 2 years of early bliss, was now effectively splitting before our eyes. Week in and week out, we were at the mercy of ecclesial roller coaster bound for imminent derailment. We got to work steadily, wearing down the interest of our long-suffering friends, growing tired of our own voices along the way. Most began to gently suggest that perhaps rather than languishing in this spiritual stall pattern and disintegrating into 2 more bitter pew warmers, we might simply find another church home. It happened all the time. To most of us, church was faithfulness spun through a revolving door. Divorcing a particular congregation was as common as a Sunday potluck. If you didn't happen to enjoy what was being served, you simply saw yourself out. It wasn't the end of the world. But for the first time, we found that our impulse to cut bait and run wasn't that simple. Without realizing it, our hearts had been won over to a parish framework where a church and its place are fundamentally intertwined, one wrapping around and through the other as they tend to the needs of their people across generations. Needlessly headstrong and profoundly frustrated, we felt both abandoned and entitled, so leaving seemed like a logical conclusion. And yet, this church was itself our neighbor. It was time for us to course correct past blind flighting and toward an enduring posture of staying. We became devoted students to the school of stubborn hope, releasing ourselves and each other from the change of stature and size. We got reacquainted with God, who saw entire worlds in water and earth and found delight in the small, the plain, and the utterly dependent. At last, we stopped obsessing about whether or not we'd reached the limits of our grace for our church and began focusing instead on our own infirmity and our personal contributions to the pain. We chose to stay and fight. As always, the winds of the Spirit were waiting to astound us. The once empty pews filled. Men and women paying their debts and living at the mercy of a crushing system were greeted by seasoned grandmas who memorized their names in no time flat. Just last Sunday, I witnessed an encounter between Lynn, a young man enthusiastically embracing his fresh start, and Arlene, a woman in her 80s with no official children of her own. After she greeted him by name — she knows everyone while the rest of us struggle to keep up — he grinned at her. "Arlene, you got your hair cut, didn't you?" She patted the top of her head shyly. "I needed one." "Well," he replied, "you look beautiful." My church family and the anatomy of our time together has reshaped my view of Sunday services. We come to worship, to grow into one another and toward the hope of our salvation. But I'm no longer interested in critiquing the particulars of the sermon or nitpicking the song choice. Now I see the physical togetherness we share as vital. Over time, this is what forms a loose band of acquaintances into family. We pass the peace, crossing the sanctuary to hug our new friends and invite them to lunch. They bring their girlfriends, their stepkids, their babies dressed to the nines. At sharing time, we hand them the mic and they gain, for maybe the first time, a voice among a body of believers who vows to support and love them, come what may. Week after week, each of us experiences a spark of being loved and chosen by someone who the world might say wasn't meant for us. They came to us utterly unable to fix our financial deficits or alleviate our need for human people to do things like take out the trash, teach classes, and flip the occasional pancake. They kept showing up in the same jeans that they wear to their factory jobs and began healing us in ways that were both harder to detect and infinitely more vital. God uses the willing hearts of his imperfect body to turn us back to him. This is one of his signature moves. Almost 20 years since that near dissemination of my marriage, I have remembered that moment by the mirror in our tiny apartment 1,000 times minimum. I remember it at the therapist's office, at the U-Haul driving east, and in the overpriced DC apartment with the parquet floor. I remembered it at the Detroit airport when a stranger handed me a 4-month-old Calvin and he stared into my eyes like I was exactly who he was looking for. I remembered it in the delivery room when another woman labored Ruby into the world, and again in Seoul, South Korea, when Silas cried until he surrendered to sleep in my arms. I remembered it on our first night in the city during my first visit to the jail. I remember it when Robert and his friends sat laughing and hoarding all the Wi-Fi at my kitchen island, and after every bad dream, when I instinctively curved my shape around my sleeping husband, my safest place, as a reminder of what is real. Sometimes God splits the seas. Other times, he pulls what has been split back together and stitches it up. Any scars are a reminder that what the world calls dead is often alive underground, saving its showstopper blooms for the ones who stick around. 2 years after we sat on the cliff edge of the church that was left waiting for her own death, I found a place where my spirit finds sanctuary. The young men, old women, and rowdy kids are the essence of who I am, stripped of all my props. Some of us are marked with cheap tattoos, others with quiet privilege. Some of us wear sensible sweater sets, and others wear leathers and chains. We all have been welcomed as a sojourner, no longer bound by shame, but set free by the rescue of God's incomparable, unexpected grace. We all have felt the embrace of a frail body defying its own death. You came to us. Please, don't leave. Now, there's no way around our limitations, our sufficient depravity, as Dallas Willard said. We believe again that a God who paid special attention to mustard seeds, water, bread, children, birds, and mud finds delight in the small and ordinary. Fully human, adequately broken, we know any credit isn't ours, growing more patient with each other as we go, forgiving as we are forgiven. It doesn't matter which hymn we're singing on a given Sunday. My song is always the same. I almost missed this. I almost missed this. In the book of Jeremiah, God called the Israelites out for caving to their basic fears. Wayward and weary, they were stuck in a pattern where trusting God was tough and running back to their perceived ideas of safety seemed to make the most sense. If you're determined to go to Egypt and live there, he warned, the very war and famine you fear will catch up to you and you will die there. Stay here in this land. If you do, I will build you up and not tear you down. I will plant you and not uproot you. Choosing to stay at times can be unhealthy or even impossible. Other times it is obedient surrender, and we just have to stick it out until the good stuff begins. Oh Lord, remind us that what we really want is more of you. You show us what it means to remain where you have placed us with great purpose. In the rumble of the city, down a winding lane, in the cookie cutter burbs where pain might show up in less obvious ways, but is breathing hot down our necks all the same. Show us the real way of worship and grant us the guts to belong to each other when it's the hardest. Teach us to walk in place, memorizing the lay of this unimpressive land and calling it good. Help us to hang on for the encore where your best work often waits. Prone to wander, Lord, we feel it. But you are here, staring back at us in every face and every scar. You keep talking to us when we don't want to listen. You remind us that you came to be with us, and even when it seems like you left, you didn't. You are here, turning our hearts to endurance, teaching us a love song for the long haul. Help us to endure when we feel dog-tired. Have your way. Amen. Sorry for the tongue twisters. Jeepers. Next time, chapter 17, the discipleship of sticking around. God bless you. Hope you join us again.